That's awesome, right? And we live currently in an age where everything is recorded, nothing is sacred, and the internet can reach out and cancel someone for something they said when they were 5 years old. Now, what do you think the role of an archaeologist will be 200 years from now? Will people still be digging up stuff from 2020? Will they be, relevant? Will those artifacts still be relevant when we have both written records as well as picture and video?
Well, archaeology has a huge role. For example, I was talking about the Arthashastra of Kautilya. So it was also from a manuscript that the text was rediscovered in 1909. So the story goes that the Arthashastra was written in its final form around the Guptan period, that is around, you can say, 1500 or 1700 years ago. But from that time, we lost the text. It was totally lost after the Guptan period. So there was a huge gap of about 1400 years between the time the Arthashastra was lost and when the manuscript was rediscovered in a library in Mysore. Right. So the manuscript was actually discovered from Tamil Nadu, and it was in Tanjavur or Tanjore that the manuscript was discovered by a pandit or a priest of a temple in the temple archives. And that pandit, he went to the Mysore Oriental Institute in Mysore, and he donated the manuscript, and he knew nothing about what he carried. Then in 1909, there was an Indologist, Sham Shastri, R. Sham Shastri, who accidentally saw the manuscript and he was able to read it. And then he came to know that whatever thing he's reading is actually the fabled lost Arthashastra. And then he started working on it. So he went all over the country collecting manuscripts from variety of places in the north and the south and the east and the west. And finally, he was able to have a corpus of manuscripts. So manuscript in turn is a part of archaeology. It's an important source of historical reconstruction. And now you have, 100 years after Shama Shastri's work on the Arthashastra, you have news articles coming in that, in 2014 general elections, the BJP used many of the tactics of the Arthashastra for winning the election. And even today, you get stuff like, when the farmers, the agitating farmers, when they were coming towards Delhi, the government of Haryana, they dug in the roads in the middle to prevent the farmers. So it's all in the Arthashastra, because even the Arthashastra says that when the enemies are approaching towards the capital, you disturb the roads. So that will actually slow down the enemy a little bit, and you have time to, go with the fortifications and the preparations. So you see that 100 years ago, it was a lost text in 1909. And then when you talk about 100 years later in 2021, you get an insight about how the text is being used very well by any government, be it the BJP government. Even we have Pandit Nehru, claiming and glamoring the Arthashastra, I think, a dozen of times in his discovery of India. He was also influenced by the ideas of Chanakya. So you can have an idea about to what extent archaeology can go and can influence matters of politics and administration. It is totally upon the shoulders of archaeology history that a lot can be achieved. Why Sanskrit is an important language to be studied, especially by scientists, because whatever texts we know in Sanskrit, most of them are still unstudied. They are unpublished. They have not been studied by any Sanskrit scholars. So we have millions and billions of manuscripts in libraries and museums all over the country and abroad. And 20 to 30% of those texts, they are related to scientific knowledge, and they're still not studied. So obviously that fertilization that can happen between a Sanskritist and a scientist, it doesn't happen normally. Right. So a person can be a Sanskritist but not a scientist, and vice versa. But if a person happens to be both, then only he can understand the true extent, the true knowledge of that particular manuscript. So you don't know what can be revealed, what can be discovered from those manuscripts and the extent to which that will influence our technology.
Okay, fair enough. Now, archaeology aims to decipher human history from the remnants that we've left behind. And this, in turn, leads to a better understanding of the present and the future. Can you take us to a time when something you discovered or were working on had a profound impact on your life and your understanding of human civilization currently?
Well, it was my, not archaeologically, but a little bit related to mummification. Because we know about ancient Egyptian mummies. We know that Egyptians made mummies. It is a very common established fact. Mummies are a famous entity of the ancient Egyptians. They are the representatives of Egyptian culture today. We have movies like The Mummy and The Mummy Returns and The Mummy 3. So you have a lot of stuff even in the televisions. But when I was studying the ancient text of India, I came to know that even in India, there was a similar process that was performed by the ancient Indians. So even ancient Indians made mummies of their dead people. But it was not exactly like the Egyptians, it was a little different. In the Valmiki Ramayana, you have a shlok in the Ayodhya Kand. That is, Tail Dronayam Tada Amatya Samvesh Jagati Patim. So it says that Tail ki droni mein, in a pot of oil, Tada Amatya, by the ministers, Samvesh Jagati Patim. So in a pot or a boat of oil, possibly mustard oil, the body of king, that is Dashrath, was kept by the ministers. So in that single shlok, you have the entire picture going on. What was happening? So if you go to the context, you see that Sri Ram and Lakshman, they left for the forest. Bharat and Shatrughan, they were in Kakya Pradesh, in their maternal home, that is modern day Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that is almost like 6 months journey from Ayodhya, if you can calculate in that time. Obviously, you didn't have flights at the time back then. So it was on horseback. So by the time Bharat comes in and can perform the cremation of his father, the body cannot let go of to be deteriorated. You cannot let it go to be degraded naturally. So you need to preserve it. So obviously, you know that even in pickles, we use oil, specifically mustard oil. Yeah. So it makes sense that oil is a preservating material. It prevents oxygen and it prevents moisture from entering into the mangoes in the pickle or the body itself if you keep it. So that was a very shocking movement for me, because that was the first time we were, knowing about the existence of mummification even in India. Because as per the tradition, the son has to perform the cremation or the Angeshti Sanskar, any of the son. So Sri Ram was the eldest son, but he went to the forest. Dashrath had to do, the cremation had to be done by Bharat. So Bharat would take almost 6 months to come back from KK, that is in Afghanistan, to Ayodhya. So by the time the body has to be kept fresh for the cremation to happen. And oil is also a very good burning material. So it would help in the cremation process. So it makes sense. And then you have another evidence from Assam. So in the 12th and the 13th century, there was a kingdom that was flourishing in Assam, the Ahom kingdom. And even there you have Bunji, or the histories of the Assamese people, the Ahom kings. And they also did a very similar process by which they would construct huge tombs. They were like mound tombs, which are known as maidons. And by the time the king dies, the construction would start. So the construction would also take 4 to 6 months, the entire tomb to be completed. So by the time the king was kept in oil and honey mixed in a proportion, and he was kept in that oil, submerged in that whole pool filled with the mixture. So that would also act, and it would help in preserving the body. So they then would bury the body after the tomb was complete inside the maidons. And then even today, you talk about the kings of Thailand. So the monarchs of Thailand, they consider themselves to be the Raghuvamshi. They have kings like Rama the 7th, Rama the 13th, and they consider themselves to be connected to Ayodhya. So even there, the king dies, the entire country goes into a year-long mourning period. And in that period, the king's body is also kept in a fetal position in the same mixture of oil and alcohol and honey and etc. And it is kept in a fetal position in a huge orb, in a huge goblet-like structure. And then it is also cremated in the same way in a very, very beautiful wooden and gold inlaid, the funeral pyre. So you see how things are getting connected. So you have Ayodhya, you have Assam, and then you have Thailand, and all the three places are connected through a single thread. That is preservation of the body before cremation. So it was not always that a person would be cremated instantly if the sun is absent. If the sun is absent, you need to preserve the body till the time he comes back and he can perform the Angeshti Sanskar. That was an eye opening for me. It was an eye opening movement for my working period. And right now I'm working on the experimental approach. So I have two, three fishes, and they died naturally in the aquarium again. So likewise, I did the same in 2017 or 2018, using fish for my Egyptian mummification. This time I have been using the lockdown period, especially in the previous year, to study the experimental approach to ancient Indian mummification. So I have done the same, and I have made the entire setup, the fishes in the oil, and we had wonderful results actually. So that shows the extent to which Indians had a very well technology of preserving food or preserving the dead before the invention of refrigeration technology. That is mind blowing, I guess.
Yeah, that is mind blowing. I did not know that we had mummification in ancient India, and that's interesting.